Is the U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal setting a blueprint for other conflicts?
Absolutely. We're starting to see the minerals for investment deals pan out elsewhere. So, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is one of the most mineral-rich jurisdictions in the world, it's got the biggest cobalt reserves in the world, one of the highest grade copper deposits in the world, lithium, nickel, tin. What we've seen is the president of Congo came to President Trump and said that he would give access to the U.S. to Congo's mineral reserves in exchange for security support, because Congo's currently in a crisis given the war with Rwanda and the M23 rebels. Just last week here in Washington at the State Department, initial principles of for peace were signed by the Congolese and Rwandan foreign ministers. Since then, they've said that they would sign a peace deal in coming days. And then ultimately, the U.S. is in the process of negotiating mineral access in the DRC for the U.S. and allied companies. This is literally seeing minerals become a driver of the U.S.'s foreign policy on a variety of continents.
Gracelyn, is this minerals deal with Ukraine good for the United States, and how so?
In terms of actual mineral security, it's not going to give us minerals tomorrow. This deal, it intentionally exempts any minerals, oil, or gas projects that are currently producing. Given on average globally, it takes 18 years to develop a mine, which is 4.5 U.S. presidential administrations. It's unlikely that we're going to see minerals in the next year or two coming from Ukraine.
Gracelyn, we finally have a minerals deal with Ukraine. Is it a good deal?
This deal is much more pro-Ukraine than previous iterations. Earlier in the first draft, we actually wanted Ukraine to give us $500 billion to repay previous aid that we had given them, and we knew that that was a really high number. However, in this new agreement, there's a couple important things. So first of all, Ukraine maintains ownership and authority of all of their natural resources. Two, it establishes a fund that's jointly managed by the U.S. and Ukraine for future mineral revenues. But importantly, the U.S. can actually use military support to capitalize its portion of the fund. So we immediately saw President Trump unlock that kind of military aid mechanism. The third thing that we see is we see a much stronger stance against Russia in this new deal that's been signed. So, for example, it prohibits anyone who has supported China from benefiting from this reconstruction agreement. Now, it's a long-term play, though. So in the shorter term, what we're hoping to do is to stimulate Ukrainian economic development. But developing a mineral sector in Ukraine is a long effort. Couple reasons. First, data. Like the geological data of Ukraine is 30 to 60 years old and was actually done by the Soviet Union. So we don't even know for many resources what is economically viable to extract. Second, mining uses a lot of energy. We're talking it can use 16% of the world's electricity and 38% of industrial power supply. Well, you and I both know a lot of the energy infrastructure was damaged and bombed out in the war. And then the third thing is without actually the peace deal that we're really looking for, there's a huge risk. So a significant amount of resources in Ukraine actually sit on Russian occupied land. And without a peace deal, there's always both the human security and the land risk that $500 million to $1 billion investment you make in a mine and the associated plant could be gone.
Is the United States in any kind of trouble in that we can't currently access rare earth materials from China?
The U.S. economy is currently at risk. I have a friend who is a trader and said that they couldn't draw down from the Asian stockpile at 20x the benchmark price, which means that ultimately most industries can't afford that, number one. And two, with the growing amount of restrictions on American companies, they may not be able to. So these restrictions actually undermine key economic sectors. For example, the automotive sector. I know automotive executives are really nervous right now because it will be a disruption to their manufacturing. Our ability to protect ourselves is currently undermined because we can't manufacture key defense technologies. So the US's inability to access this really gives it two options. One, which we're already doing, is accelerating the development of our domestic capabilities. But until then, negotiating will be a really key component. Because this was, at the end of the day, a retaliation to the tariff war. And we've already seen the first steps of what will be a tariff negotiation with China.
Are there other countries besides China that can supply the United States with rare earth minerals?
There are a range of international partners that are well positioned to supply us if we so choose. So, for example, China has about 38% of the world's rare earths. They produce about 60%. They separate close to 90% between light and heavy. However, if you add up Vietnam and Brazil, you have almost the same quantity as China. So Vietnam has about 19% of the world's rare earths, and Brazil has 18%. A lot of these reserves are actually untapped. So when I look at a country like Brazil, they have 18% of the world's rare earths, but last year they produced less than 0.5%, which means that there is significant potential to scale that up. Now, the difficulty that the US, faces now is if we go get those offtake agreements right now, we still can't separate them here. So these rare earths from around the world have to go to China. However, once we build our separation capabilities here in the US, partnering with international partners will be critical because at the end of the day, the US still has less than 1.5% of the world's rare earths. So we can have all of the separation capabilities in the world, but if we don't work with our allies to get the actual rock to bring here, then our separation capabilities will be underutilized.
How long would it take for the United States to start mining rare earth minerals here? And are we already trying to do so?
So the US has to mine and separate rare earths. Currently, we do have an operating mine. There's a company called MP Materials that is based in California and mines rare earths. They are able to separate a limited quantity of light rare earths and are currently working on their heavy rare earth separation capabilities before they would go to a permanent magnet factory in Texas. Now, the difficulty is MP Materials, while a significant producer relative to America, the rare earths American landscape, still isn't going to be enough. The reality in the United States is permitting is complicated, and on average in the US, it takes 29 years from the time that I identify a deposit to the time that I have a producing mine. A lot of the Trump administration's efforts now are to accelerate that timeline to make sure that they can get permits and get producing faster so that we have a big source of feedstock that we can then send to the separation facilities that we have financed through the Defense Production Act.
Why are rare earths so important for U.S. national security?
CSIS recently put out a report through our Defense and Security Department where they noted that China is actually outpacing the United States at a rate of 5 to 6x in terms of manufacturing and procuring the weapons that we need to keep ourselves safe. The difficulty is with these new rare earth export restrictions is two things. First of all, we need these materials for our industrial base to surge in the case of conflict. The second difficulty is alongside these new restrictions, China put 16 American companies on an export control list that prevents them from accessing these dual-use materials. 15 of these companies are actually defense and aerospace companies, which means that even with the new licensing system, they won't be able to access it. So at the end of the day, if we go under attack, we are now unable to take care of ourselves if we don't find another source of rare earths.
How dependent is the United States on China for rare earth minerals?
The United States is heavily reliant on China, which is why we've seen it become an interesting tool in the current trade war. So there are two types of rare earths. There's light rare earths and heavy rare earths, and they're literally categorized by how much they weigh. For light rare earths, we are a little bit less reliant because we have a limited capability to mine and separate them here in the US. The difficulty is actually for the heavy rare earths, which are the ones that we just got hit with export restrictions. We actually mine a little bit in the US, but we send even what we mine in the US to China to go through that heavy rare earth separation phase. At present, China actually separates 100% of the world's heavy rare earths. So we don't really have an option of securing them without the Chinese supply chain.
Gracelyn, why are rare earth minerals so important to modern economies and what are they used for?
Rare earths are used in virtually every sector of the economy. So when we think about our defense technologies, they are used in F-35 fighter jets, Virginia and Columbia class submarines, unmanned aerial aircraft, Tomahawk missiles. They're also used in key medical uses like PET scanners, MRI machines, cancer treatment. They're used in the EV motors in our cars, phones, computers. So they cross-cut every part of the economy. They're also used to generate electricity for electronic systems in aircraft, found in microwave energy and radar systems. So they're important to national energy and economic security.
Gracelyn, what are rare earth minerals and are they actually rare?
Rare earth minerals are a group of 17 minerals, and they're a total misnomer because they're not rare. They're everywhere. but they're often found in small quantities and difficult to extract. So the trick that we have is finding large-scale deposits of rare earths. Rare earths are used in both permanent magnets and catalysts, and a rare earth magnet is actually the strongest permanent magnet possible. They're stronger than their ceramic counterparts, and they're used in a variety of dual-use military and civilian technologies. For example, they're used in aerospace, defense, high-temperature motors, medical devices like MRI scanners, and satellite equipment.